Today on Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural Report, we have a very special guest. His name is Bill Salus. Bill has written numerous books. He has basically become sort of an expert, in fact, probably the go-to expert concerning the Middle East and how it dovetails into the biblical prophetic narrative. Just hop right into it because you know how time just flies by on these things. You've got a brand new book. It's called Introducing the Now Prophecies. Why did you title the book that?
Well, it's interesting. I've been working on some lessons in 2015, trying to prepare people for prophecies that I really believe could happen in their lifetime. The now prophecies are the prophecies that have either minimal or no preconditions, which means they can happen now in our lifetime. And, you know, I'm very concerned about these. I think they're going to come off the parchment and hit the pavement real soon. And it's interesting how I came up with the title. And I don't normally share supernatural things or dreams with people, but in this case, I do put it in the book. I open it up and talk about how I got the title. I was actually dreaming one night, and in the dream, this was just at the end of 2015, this dream took place. God was speaking to me in the dream, Elaine, and he said, Bill, I want you to call your next project the Now Prophecies. And in the dream, I said to myself, wow, that's unbelievable. That's exactly what I've been working on. That's the perfect title for everything I've been working on, the messages I believe God had given me. And I thought, I was kind of in this blissful state, still dreaming, and all of a sudden the phone rang. It was like 1:59 in the morning. I got up out of the dream. I used it as a prompt to get up out of the dream and pray about the Now Prophecies and just so I wouldn't forget the dream. And so anyway, to make a long story short, the name of the book, I believe, was given to me in a dream called The Now Prophecies, and they deal with the prophecies that I believe could happen, of course, now or in the very near future.
Bill, you're the author of one of my favorite books, the Psalm 83 War, and you basically steered the entire biblical prophetic community onto another course when that book broke. It was very controversial. You had a lot of naysayers, people that came up and said, you know, that can't possibly be. But people like Chuck Missler have come on, you know, onto your side of the aisle, as it were. Gary Stearman of Prophecy Watchers, Tom Horn of Skywatch TV. So you really, literally turned the course of the prophetic narrative and made people, sort of gave them a heads up on the Psalm 83 war. Is that, you know, talking about a timeline here? And here's the question. Speaking of a timeline, and before I ask the question, I just have to comment that today, in the early part of February, the Turkish Air Force now is pounding positions in Syria. Are we looking at World War III? But with that in mind, Psalm 83, where is that on the prophetic timeline, in your opinion?
Well, I think it is a now prophecy. You know, in the book, I classify prophecies that have yet to find fulfillment into three categories: now, next, and last.
Okay.
The now prophecies are the ones, like I said, that could really happen. They're almost imminent at this point. There are some other prophecies that are stage setting that are about to happen, but they have a few preconditions. And so you wouldn't really call them now, you'd say they're next. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
The harlot world religion in Revelation chapter 17. A lot of us teach that will come in after that's the counterfeit bride, that's the harlot. That'll come in after the real bride is raptured and taken out. Then the counterfeit bride comes in. Or, for instance, 144,000 witnesses in Revelation 7. They become God's first fruits, we're told in Revelation 14, to witness the gospel out to the nations of the world. I believe they would come on the scene after the church is also taken out. Or Ezekiel 38, I believe, is a very important prophecy. But I don't believe that's ready to happen just yet, because Israel has to be drawn securely without walls, bars, nor gates, etc. So those are important prophecies. They're about to happen, but they're next. And then there's the last ones that happen to conclude the tribulation period. And you got the Antichrist, and you've got the third Jewish temple gets abominated, and the bowl judgments. So we've got this whole menu of prophecies about to find fulfillment. And my goal is to try to put them in some sort of sequencing so that people can learn about them and prepare for them. You know, L.A., you and I have talked many times about Bible prophecies. And, you know, in many households these days, it's table talk. I mean, people are worried about what's going on, and they're wondering what the Bible has to say about these things. But we're looking at a time right now that's so critical. It's no longer time for just table talk in these prophecies. It would be like if God came to Jeremiah, which he did, and then Jeremiah 25 started warning, hey, listen, tell the Jews they're going to get ready to go into 7 years of captivity, the people of the southern kingdom of Judah. Let them know that's going to happen real soon. Well, that's a warning Jeremiah gave them, and they got ready all of a sudden. They started packing up their tents and getting their canned goods and getting ready to go. And just like when Joseph was told you're going to have 7 years of famine, but by the way, you'll have 7 years of plenty beforehand. Joseph didn't wait till year 6 to start preparing. So my goal is, okay, what could happen now, and how should we start preparing now? Let's certainly be interested in the 144,000 witnesses, and let's talk about the Antichrist. Yes, there's important prophecies, but up front and center, let's get people ready for what the prophecies that could happen right now that have no precondition.
When you and I have talked about this on shows and at conferences numerous times, specifically the Isaiah 17 prophecy, which states that Damascus has become a ruinous heap. With that in mind, Bill, and what's going on over there now that the Russians have come down and joined the fray, and we're talking thousands, tens of thousands of troops and tanks and planes, and I mean basically the whole Russian armada, and we've seen drone footage which is just alarming. It seems to be that the suburbs around Damascus have literally are dead zones. They become a ruinous heap. Your thoughts on where the Isaiah 17 prophecy fits into this timeline?
Yeah, exactly. I consider Isaiah 17 with other enhancing details of Jeremiah chapter 49, verses 23 through 27 about Damascus.
Okay.
I consider that very much a now prophecy, as I do Psalm 83. LA, I kind of didn't answer your Psalm 83 question, and it's an important prophecy, but these two prophecies may be very much related. Isaiah 17, let's start there for a minute.
Sure.
This speaks in verse 1 of a city, the oldest continuously inhabited city in recorded history, Damascus, the capital of Syria. Of course, it's in shambles now, but it's someday going to cease to exist. It's going to be a ruinous heap, reduced to rubble. We're told in Isaiah 17, verse 14, that it happens overnight. And we're told in verse 9 that it's actually caused by the children of Israel, i.e. the Israeli Defense Forces. And we know that Syria has threatened to attack Tel Aviv and Israel if Israel were to attack Syria. Of course, Israel's been attacking Syria on several occasions over the last couple of years during this revolution, trying to prevent weapons from getting into Hezbollah's hands and things like that. And Syria has not retaliated yet, but Syria has said they will retaliate and they would take out Tel Aviv. And what Israel's response was, is we will then strategically attack Damascus and pretty much take it out.
Wipe it out, sure.
So what we see going on in Syria right now is a chaotic revolution with millions of refugees, but it's not the fulfillment of Isaiah 17. However, Syria could easily come against Israel, upset Israel at this point in time, especially with ISIS moving in and barreling into the situation. And the next thing you know, you've got Israel taking out Damascus. And it sounds like it's a nuclear prophecy. And Israel has the ability to take out a city with their nuclear arsenal and do it in such a way where they can contain the fallout a little bit, depending on where they detonate the firebomb. So they say roughly 45 miles above a city will take out the city, but not suck up all the dirt particles into the mushroom cloud. So, and I'm not an expert in that area, but I'm looking at Isaiah 17 as one of the next prophecies, one of the now prophecies that could happen next, trying to clarify the differences there. But I don't think it's the actual prophecy that will happen next. I think the next prophecy is going to happen in Jeremiah 49 with Iran.
And you mentioned Iran, and of course, even talking about Syria, we must include, or at least discuss on some level, the Shia crescent. And this has got the Sunni Muslims, which are the majority in Islam, specifically led by the Saudis, Saudi Arabia, very alarmed. And even just February 15th, the Saudis are now talking about going into Syria. So this is, everything at the NT is definitely being up there. It's off the scale, in my opinion. Explain to us briefly what the Shia crescent is and why that's alarming.
Right. Well, the primary two factions in Islam are Sunni and Shia, or Shiite, and probably about 80% of the Muslims in the world are Sunni, and the others would be Shiite. So, for instance, Saudi Arabia is Sunni, Iran is Shiite. Iran's proxies are Shiite, which would be Hezbollah, and then Bashar al-Assad, the Alawite regime, and Syria's president, he's also a Shiite. And they're trying to spread their hegemony throughout the Middle East. And that Iran getting a nuclear weapon, which is their goal, has got everybody around them concerned, Israel and these Sunni countries. and they want to spread their hegemony throughout the Middle East. They've already got control over some pretty fine property. They've got Lebanon with Beirut, they're controlling with the Hezbollah. They've got Syria pretty much controlled with Bashar al-Assad. They got Iraq down in the Baghdad area with their president over there in Iraq. And then you've got the Houthis in Yemen.
Right.
So they're already moving their tentacles in throughout the Middle East. And, you know, the goal of the Muslims is to establish an Islamic caliphate in the Middle East that then spreads out through the rest of the world. And whether ISIS wants it, of course, to be Sunni-led, ISIS is Sunnis, whereas Iran wants it to be Shiite-led. But they still want control. They want to subrogate the planet for Islam, either faction, and control the planet. And that's the goal. And they're finding with this current Obama administration that they have an opportunity to start spreading their tentacles throughout the Middle East, both ISIS, Iran, without any impunity. No, they realize no one's going to do anything to stop that. And so we've got a very dangerous spread of a bad religion going on right now in the Middle East, and it's liable to come into our backyard in America. It already is. San Bernardino, LA, which is a couple hours from your studio right now. We had that attack happen just about a month and a half back. So, you know, it's a dangerous time right now.
And, of course, Obama's allowing 300,000 so-called refugees coming in from the Middle East. And, look, even if 1% of them are terrorists, I mean, how many more San Bernardinos do we actually need in this country? The answer to that is a big fat zero. But you mentioned a caliphate. And what's interesting, Bill, I want you to address this. And you just talked about, you know, the Sunni or the Shia. But we've got ISIS wants to establish a caliphate. The Saudis want to establish a caliphate. The Muslim Brotherhood wants to establish a caliphate. And, of course, the Iranians do, too. So you've got all these factions within Islam all vying for caliphate. Speak to that, please.
Well, right. Ultimately, the goal of a caliphate is an Islamic government that is based upon Sharia law, Islamic law, that governs the world. They believe that is their goal. Allah is going to want to subrogate the planet so that that kind of law can be implemented and that government can be put in place. And, you know, you get a picture of what that looks like in Saudi Arabia and Iran and Syria. It's very repressive. It's 7th century Islam. It's
yes.
in the modern era. It's, you know, state-censored TV. It's women that can't walk down in the street without their hijab on and their full garments. It's, you know, male chauvinistic, anti-Christian, anti-Israel. It's the worst scenario you could imagine playing out in the Middle East, trying to make it into a theater nearby your audience. And that's a great concern. Now, that is not going to happen in my estimation, and I can tell reasons for that. But the bottom line is it's on the move, and it can harm us until it's curbed. And, you know, so we could be in its sights. And I would really still be concerned not to take it lightly.
You know, Benjamin Netanyahu stood up a while back in the United Nations, and he basically stated, I mean, he blasted his fellow members. He glared at them, and that footage is absolutely dramatic. And when you see just the intensity on Bibi's face, on Netanyahu's face, as he just stares, and it went on for 45 seconds, as he went around the room and just glared, basically stared down his constituents, basically calling it the Iranian deal a really bad deal. And of course it is. Donald Trump, the presidential candidate right now, the front runner, has also called the Iranian deal a very bad deal. Here's what I want to know, Bill. A nuclear Iran. Why should not only we here in the United States, which are thousands of miles away, but in the Middle East, the neighbors, why should Israel fear a nuclear Iran?
Well, you know, Iran is really one of the most repressive Islamic regimes in the world right now. Everybody's focusing on ISIS and how bad they are. Well, the bottom line is ISIS doesn't control sovereignly a country. They've got some swaths in northern Syria, northern Iraq, and they're really aggressively looking at Jordan next. But Iran is dug into the revolutionary, the Iranian regime took over in 1979, and they dug into that whole country, and they control it. And they have a lot of money now with the sanctions being released, and they're going to try to get a nuclear weapon. They have a foothold in the Middle East. They consider Israel the little Satan, America the great Satan. So let's take that seriously to heart. Those are not just generic terms. They literally do think we are the great Satan here. And their goal is to do whatever they have to do with nuclear energy to control the Middle East and the world. And they feel that Satan is going to do that because they also have
excuse me, they feel that Allah is going to do that. I consider that a satanic scenario, but they believe Allah is going to lead them to that because they have an apocalyptic mindset. They have an eschatology of their own. They believe that ultimately a Mahdi is going to return, and he's going to set up his kingdom, and Allah is about ready to do that, and an apocalyptic condition could create that, could bring that forward quickly. So they're a very dangerous situation. Now, you talk about this deal, this bad deal, and it is a bad deal, and I think Netanyahu is correct to say it's a bad deal, but I also think God's upset with this deal. You know, there's a prophecy in Jeremiah 49, it's a now prophecy, I call it, and it's dealing with Elam, E-L-A-M, which is where that part of Iran that hugs the Persian Gulf, where they've got the Bushehr nuclear reactor. We've talked about it before, L.A., and it says in the prophecy, Jeremiah 49, verses 34 through 39, that a time is going to come where the Lord is going to be extremely upset with the Iranian leadership. And we find out why he's upset with them. He says he's going to destroy them, the kings and the princes, he'll destroy them. And he's upset with them because they want to launch something lethal somewhere, we're told in the prophecy. Because he says he's going to break their bow with their foremost of their might, which will prevent them from launching whatever it is they want to launch somewhere. A prophecy is not found fulfillment yet, so we're not talking about bows and arrows. So they want to launch something somewhere lethal, and the Lord's going to prevent that. And the Lord's angry with them because they want that. That's their goal. Now, it says there'll be a disaster that ensues when the bow is broken at the foremost of Iran's might. And the disaster is of the magnitude that the affected indigenous population is dispersed worldwide. It's not like the Syrian Revolution where these people are fleeing into the neighboring states for refuge. It is a worldwide dispersion. It says there'll be no nations where these exiles don't go, nations plural. So I believe that's probably the next prophecy. It's right at the top of the now list of prophecies in my book. And I believe that the Lord is furious with Iran right now. This nuclear deal is a bad thing. It's not going to bode well for our country for being one of the major proponents of this nuclear deal. I believe Israel is going to have to take action against Iran. It says that Iran will be attacked by its enemies. It'll say it'll be dismayed by its enemies. So not only the Sunni states are concerned about Iran, not only the international community is concerned about Iran, but Israel is very concerned about Iran. And the reason the reason I think the Lord is extremely furious with Iran right now is because the Lord is about to uphold his holy name in the midst of his people Israel. He's not going to allow them to profane it anymore, and the nation shall know that he's God. This is in the Ezekiel invasion. Ezekiel 39, verse 7, we're told that after God stops that invasion, and he's going to let the world will know that he's God. He's a covenant-keeping God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this is where we're all heading toward prophetically. We're seeing Israel back in the land. We're seeing Russia starting to build up its muscle power, its might, and they're involved in Ezekiel 38. And so, but Iran wants to wipe them off the map, and they're about to have a nuclear weapon. So God will not allow that to happen. And I think God is extremely furious with this nuclear deal, and he's extremely upset with the Iranian leadership today.
Bill, we're down to like basically a 5-minute mark here, and I just want to two quick questions. You mentioned the Mahdi, and a lot of people, you know, you and I know what those terms are, but many of the audience do not know what the Mahdi is. Please just give us a quick summation of what the Iranians, of course, the Shia branch of Islam, are awaiting in this Mahdi character.
Well, right. They're basically waiting for the differences between Shiites and Sunnis. They all have the same pillars of Islam, you know, the main 5 pillars of Islam. They agree with the same things in Islam. Where they split mostly is who should be the actual heir, the caliph, from Muhammad. The Sunnis believe it should be an elected individual. Doesn't necessarily have to be a direct descendant, whereas the Shiites believe it has to be a direct descendant. They're looking for the direct descendant who was a 12-year-old who died. I forget his name, but they're expecting him to resurrect and be their Messiah and lead the caliphate. So this is their bizarre eschatology. They're expecting this direct descendant of Muhammad to resurrect and reign in their Islamic caliphate is what they're looking for.
You know, interestingly enough, Bill, if I can add something in that, they're also expecting Jesus, Yeshua, to come back with the Mahdi. And this is amazing. The Mahdi will teach Jesus how to pray. I mean, to Christians, to us, that's utterly blasphemous. Your thoughts?
Yeah, they actually have Jesus in their eschatology, but not as the Messiah, the only Son of God, through whom no other name is given in the scriptures to which men can be saved. So they've got it all twisted around. They call him Isa. This Jesus is showing up in the households and personal encounters of many Iranians right now, the true Jesus of the Bible, with dreams, visions, miracles. I put stories in the book. You've interviewed people from Iran on your Watchers 9 DVD with Mansour and others. You know what's going on over there. This Jesus is making huge supernatural inroads into Iran and elsewhere, Syria, places like that. But they don't treat him as the only begotten Son of God. They look at him as just a great prophet or a teacher, and they do put him in their eschatology. But it's not confuse your audience. It's not the Jesus of the Bible, the Savior that they're looking at him as.
When we sat down in Watchers 9, one of the questions I asked him, and I want you to address this, was, are the Iranian people really the hatred, the vitriol against the West, against Israel, is that really there? And well, most of the Iranians really don't like the regime, but they're powerless to do anything because the mullahs control the army, and really it's a totalitarian type government. Speak to that for us, please.
Right. I'd like Americans to understand that a lot of the Iranians are pro-American. I mean, they got the internet, they got satellite TV. They've had a chance to look out of state-sponsored, censored media and to see what life's like out there. And they've had a taste of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But they're very repressed. They can't revolt like you've seen in other places. They can't have their Arab Spring, and of course their Persians are not Arabs, because the regime that's in charge knows how to stop a revolution. They knew how to start one, and now they know how to stop one. And so they're stuck. They're really in a real predicament there. But Jesus knew that. Jesus knew a time would come when, places Jonah couldn't get into, missionaries can scarcely go. He would have to go in through dreams, visions, and supernatural evangelism to make the difference. And he is.
The stories are incredible about what's going on.
Yes, they are.
These people coming to the Lord.
Bill, we're going to have to pick this up in another show. Thanks so much for coming on the record. Bill Salus, everybody. Why aren't more churches discussing this and talking about this and arming their people?